Disclaimer: this episode is an educational documentary based on publicly available official records, declassified documents, congressional materials, and cited media sources. We do not claim new findings, accuse any person or organization, or encourage hatred, harassment, or harm. Some historical events remain debated or disputed. We present them only as documented in the cited sources. Welcome back to American Power Series. This is where we open the files, follow the paper trail, and look at the moments when American power moved quietly behind the public story. In Episode 2, we open COINTLPRO. That was the FBI program built to disrupt and discredit movements inside America. Today, we move from letters and informants to something even bigger. The wires. The cables. The messages moving in and out of the United States. Before emails. Before smartphones. Before social media. There was a surveillance story built around telegrams. And the name of that story was Project Shamrock. Now here is the question. What if the government did not need to break into your home to read your communication? What if it could simply receive copies from the companies carrying the messages? That is the core of Project Shamrock. And this story is not speculation. It appears in public Senate history and in a declassified NSA account of the investigations that changed American intelligence oversight. To understand Shamrock, we have to go back to a world before the internet. In that world, long-distance international communication often moved through cable and telegraph companies. Messages crossed borders through corporate systems that connected people, businesses, journalists, diplomats, and governments. Now imagine a global information highway. But instead of fiber optic lines and cloud servers, picture cable rooms, telegram forms, operators, microfilm, and paper records. That was the world Shamrock grew inside. The public NSA history says that under censorship laws during both world wars, cable companies had been required to furnish the U.S. government with copies of telegrams they sent out, even messages from private individuals. During war, governments often claim emergency powers. But here is where the story turns. After World War II ended, the intelligence community wanted to continue access to international cable traffic. So the emergency practice did not simply disappear. It evolved. So what exactly was Project Shamrock? According to the declassified NSA document, NSA called the acquisition of drop copies of cables Project Shamrock. That phrase matters. Drop copies. Not a single warrant for a single target. Not one suspect. Not one phone line. Copies of cable traffic. The NSA document says cable companies provided copies of outgoing international messages to NSA. The Senate Church Committee history says Shamrock and Minaret monitored wire communications to and from the United States and shared some of that data with other intelligence agencies. Now pause there. To and from the United States. That means this was not only foreign spying far away from American life. The system touched communication connected to America. And that is why the story became so explosive when investigators found it. The next obvious question is simple. Why would the companies cooperate? The NSA's public history says that after the war, a succession of attorneys general and secretaries of defense assured the cable companies that they would not be prosecuted for undertaking what was described as a patriotic duty. That line reveals the atmosphere of the time. Cold War fear. National security pressure. Government officials asking for cooperation. Companies being told they would not face prosecution. And once a system like that starts, it can become normal. 1 month becomes 1 year. 1 year becomes a decade. And a wartime exception becomes a peacetime habit. That is one of the recurring themes of American Power series. Power often expands during crisis. The real test is whether it shrinks when the crisis ends. Project Shamrock was dangerous because it was quiet. It did not need a dramatic public raid. It did not need a televised hearing at the beginning. It lived in arrangements, in copies, in procedures, in a flow of records from private communications systems into a government intelligence pipeline. And because the public could not see that pipeline, the public could not debate it. That is the central issue. A democracy cannot meaningfully consent to a secret system it does not know exists. The NSA document says the program continued until the early 1970s when Director Lou Allen decided the practice, although probably legal, did not pass the smell test and terminated it. That phrase is almost too human for a story this technical. The smell test. In other words, even if lawyers could argue about legality, something about it felt wrong. And sometimes that is where oversight begins. Not with a perfect legal theory. With someone finally asking, should we still be doing this? So how did America find out? The answer runs through the Church Committee. The Senate's history says the committee was created in 1975 to investigate intelligence activities and determine the extent of illegal, improper, or unethical conduct by federal agencies. At first, the public story was mostly about the CIA. But the declassified NSA account says that during a document search, Senate staffers found references to the SHAMROCK operation. That discovery pulled NSA deeper into the investigation. Think about that moment. Staffers are searching records. They find a reference, a code name, SHAMROCK. And behind that code name, a communication pipeline most Americans had never heard of. The Senate page says the committee eventually reviewed roughly 110,000 documents, interviewed about 800 witnesses, and held 126 full committee meetings. This was not a casual inquiry. It was Congress forcing the hidden architecture of intelligence into the light. Project Shamrock is often discussed next to Project Minaret. They were not the same thing. Shamrock was about access to cable traffic. Minaret was about watch lists. The NSA document says Minaret involved monitoring communications of individuals through rosters of names of people of interest. It also says the program crossed the line by targeting the communications of domestic dissidents. So Shamrock helped create the pool. Minaret helped point attention toward names. That combination is what makes the history feel modern. Bulk access on one side. Target lists on the other. Data first. Questions later. And once you understand that structure, you can see why Shamrock still matters in the age of digital surveillance. The technology changed. The dilemma did not. The Senate's Church Committee history says investigators found a wide range of intelligence abuses by federal agencies, including the CIA, FBI, IRS, and NSA. It also says investigators identified programs that had never before been known to the American public, including NSA's projects Shamrock and Minaret. The committee's final report concluded that intelligence agencies had undermined constitutional rights because checks and balances had not been applied. That is the heart of the episode. The problem was not only one program. The problem was a system where secrecy became stronger than oversight, where agencies could collect, share, and act without the public knowing the rules, and where the people affected by surveillance might never know their communications had been touched. So why should anyone today care about telegrams? Because Shamrock is not really about telegrams. It is about the relationship between government power and private communication systems. It is about what happens when national security agencies depend on companies that carry the public's messages. It is about the difference between targeted surveillance and broad access. And it is about what democracy loses when oversight arrives decades late. The Senate says the Church Committee led to reforms, including stronger oversight structures and the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. Those reforms matter. But they also prove the larger point. The system needed guardrails because the system had already crossed lines. Project Shamrock began in the age of cables and telegrams. But the question it leaves behind belongs to every generation. When communication changes, does the Constitution travel with it? Or does technology give power a new hiding place? This was American Power Series. Next file, Operation Mockingbird, the story of power, press, influence, and the battle over what Americans were allowed to believe.